We start in the East, where we see Asian shares beginning the week under a cloud after losses on Wall Street. Also, investors' attention turning from central banks to American politics ahead of the first U.S. presidential debate. So when we look at the East, Japan, a strong yen soured overall sentiment, and Apple supplies underperformed on worries about weak overseas iPhone sales. The Nikkei dropping 1.3%. Hong Kong stocks suffering their biggest single-day drop in 2 weeks. The Hang Seng Index falling by 1.6%. On mainland China, stocks dropped to a 7-week low, dampened by falls in the property sector. So that saw the Shanghai Composite Index losing 1.8%. All right, over in the United States, well, as always, we take a look at the picture on Friday when we saw Wall Street retreating as lower oil prices weighed on energy shares and Facebook and Apple declined. But major indexes still posted gains for the week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average falling by 0.75%. The S&P 500 losing just 0.5 percentage point. And the Nasdaq Composite dropping by 0.6%. All right, let's get more details now on what's influencing the markets. Nompu at the JSE, I would imagine it's still the residue from that Federal Reserve decision we saw almost a week and a half ago.
Thanks very much, Devon. Yes, well, look, the market generally expected the US Fed not to move, and indeed it didn't move. So it is somewhat surprising that there's been this backlash. There may be several reasons why. You cited a little bit in your introduction about people now focusing on American politics. You know, markets are very fickle and they're swayed and moved by so many factors. I think the central bank's decisions are sort of history now, and then people are now looking forward to whatever's going to happen in the future. But you know, they'll hold on to any issue as a reason for why they're doing what they're doing. And I think sometimes there's a herd mentality. People don't really know why they're selling off. But right now we're seeing markets in sell-off territory. And the Rand was one of the best performing emerging market currencies last week. But it remains to be seen whether it's going to hold on to that strength this week. There are a couple of factors that may change that this week. Data coming out. We've got trade figures coming out at the end of this week. It's expected by the market that the surpluses that we've been seeing may actually narrow somewhat. The Reserve Bank did allude to that last week as well. And we also have private sector credit extension data coming out, which is also expected to slow, showing that the consumer not doing so well. Let's take a look at the indicators. Gary Boyson, he's from Rand Swiss. Thank you very much for joining us, Gary.
Good to be here.
What's with the sell-off?
It's a very good question. I've been looking around to try and work out exactly what it is. I mean, all sorts of different media outlets pointing to different reasons. I mean, we've got obviously the Hillary Clinton Donald Trump debate tomorrow. You've got maybe a little bit of a reversal of the sentiment around those central bank announcements last week. So the optimism of the Fed not hiking rates wearing off, and people starting to look at whether they're going to hike in December or not. We've had a little bit of a tightening of monetary policy by the People's Bank of China as well, taking a little bit of liquidity out of the system. So there's a lot of things. There's also discussions around a hard Brexit as well, which is front page of the FT this morning. So there's a lot of concerns, but nothing really tangible. And perhaps it's just the market moving into risk-off mode in the wake of fairly low volumes and a week where we have some economic data, but also very, very light on international corporate data as well and local corporate data.
You did say that maybe the market will get moving again and we'll see some high volumes once the earnings seasons get started.
Yeah, so like I said, at the moment, the corporate news, especially out of the US and Europe, is very, very low. So, especially when you're looking at equity markets, you need to hear from the companies to, start to reprice them. And that really, I think, gets investors excited as well. So that will start up probably the next 2 weeks or so. And traditionally, I mean, the US earnings season has always been a very positive, I suppose, event for the market. So, looking forward to getting a little bit more news flow, definitely.
Today we heard that Moody's downgraded Turkey, its sovereign credit rating to junk. Obviously, being an emerging market area, there one could fear contagion. How does South Africa look when we look at Turkey?
Yeah, I think, again, Turkey and South Africa, people look at them as two of the emerging markets that are fairly almost linked. What happens in Turkey, people, almost, extrapolate that and say if that's happening in Turkey, it can easily happen in a market like South Africa. But remember that, Turkey's coming off 15th of July, it was a coup. South Africa, we have no coups. We have a thriving democracy, so a very different environment. But sort of sitting, we look at the cost of insuring government debt, which is a CDS spread. And there, South Africa and Turkey almost in line. Obviously, it's the Turkey now with the downgrade, blowing out a little bit. We've seen their currency weakening. It was only about 1%, so a lot of that already priced in. The Turkish lira is down around 40% from when the Fed actually started its tapering program. And also, obviously, the exchange there also down about 4%, but definitely not the huge disaster that perhaps people were expecting. And just showing how financial markets can price in these kind of events, and definitely something for us to consider looking forward to, our own potential downgrade in December.
I mentioned the Rand doing quite well relative to other emerging market currencies last week. Will it hold its own this week? You did mention that there's not going to be much data and so on, but what's the prognosis, do you think?
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of what the market's been looking at is actually the SAB Honors InBev deal. It seems that the market's really latched onto this and decided that the stronger Rand is because AB InBev has been buying up into Rand to pay out the South African shareholders. And whether that's true or not, it's very difficult to determine. But if it's in the market and speculators start to believe that, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy anyway. I saw reports saying that they might need to buy up to 100 billion rands worth of stock, and that will help to firm up our currency. The real question is when that overhang disappears, what will happen? Again, we're pretty light on economic data. We've had probably a more hawkish South African Reserve Bank, which can easily see, I think, the currency move back above 14 to the dollar and probably further.
Well, speaking of the Reserve Bank, we do have trade data coming out later this week, and they did suggest that perhaps the surpluses that we've been seeing are going to be somewhat narrower than before. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of this data is also very, very fickle. So it moves around a lot, and there's a lot of volatility in the specific numbers. But there's no question that, if you look at the local economic metrics, the South African economy is under pressure. We obviously got a far better GDP print recently, but, if you look at the fundamental underlying economy, you look at the business sales numbers, you look at business confidence as well. There's no question South Africa is going through a very difficult time at the moment. But that said, it's a low base to grow off. And we've got a massive unemployment rate, but that can also be viewed as a huge opportunity to bring people into the middle class and to really expand. But it requires the correct policy decisions to be made, and I think it requires our institutions to remain sound, and it requires the political will to make sure that we can move forward in a positive light. All
right, Gary, thanks. We're going to leave it there. I've got someone in my ear. That was Gary Boyson. He's from Rand Swiss. After the break, Devon has more business news.